Sarah Martinez had seen enough death for 10 lifetimes. 22 years in the Navy SEALs, 12 of those as one of the most feared snipers in the special operations community, had left her with skills most people couldn't imagine and memories she wished she could forget. At 44, she was done with wars, done with cities, and done with people who thought they knew better than nature itself. The real estate agent had warned her about the property. 8,000 acres of rugged Montana wilderness, accessible only by a single dirt road that became impassable in winter. No cell phone coverage. The nearest neighbor was 30 miles away. The previous owner had died alone in the cabin, not discovered until spring thaw revealed his remains. Most folks want something a bit more accessible, the agent had said, clearly hoping to steer Sarah toward a nice suburban home with good resale value. Sarah had smiled the kind of smile that made people uncomfortable. I'm not most folks. She paid cash, $3.2 million from her savings, investments, and the inheritance from her grandfather's ranch in Texas. No mortgage, no payments, no ties to the financial world that seemed to complicate everything these days. The deed was simple. Sarah Elena Martinez, owner of the Black Rock Mountain Preserve. The cabin was solid, but basic. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since 1985, and a living room dominated by a massive stone fireplace. The previous owner had been a survivalist of sorts, and the property came with a generator, solar panels that barely worked, and a water system fed by mountain springs. What sold Sarah on the place wasn't the cabin or even the stunning views of the Continental Divide. It was the wildlife. Within an hour of arriving, she'd spotted elk, a small herd of bighorn sheep, and fresh bear tracks near the stream that ran through the property. This was what she'd been missing during all those years overseas. This was home. The first few months were spent learning the land. Sarah had grown up on her grandfather's ranch, but Montana wilderness was different from Texas hills. She spent her days hiking, mapping the terrain in her mind, noting game trails and water sources. Her military training served her well. She moved through the forest like a ghost, observing without being observed. The wildlife didn't fear her. Maybe they sensed she meant no harm, or maybe her years of staying invisible had taught her to project calm instead of threat. The elk grew comfortable grazing near the cabin. A family of foxes den up near her woodpile. Even the black bears seemed to accept her presence, though she always gave them plenty of space. Sarah established routines that kept her sane. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the peaks. Days spent maintaining the property, cutting firewood, improving the solar system. Evenings reading by lamplight or sitting by the fire, planning improvements for the next day. She installed better security cameras, not because she feared break-ins, but because she wanted to document the wildlife. The feeds showed her things she might have missed. A mountain lion padding through her yard at midnight, an enormous bull elk that stood 7 feet at the shoulder, a golden eagle that nested in the cliffs above her cabin. The isolation didn't bother her. After years of being surrounded by teammates, commanders, and the constant noise of military operations, silence was a gift. She could hear her own thoughts again. She could sleep without dreaming of crosshairs and targets. But the peace didn't last. The first sign of trouble came in late spring, almost a year after she'd bought the property. Sarah was checking her trail cameras when she found images that made her blood run cold. Men in camouflage, carrying rifles, moving through her land in the pre-dawn darkness. They weren't hunters. Hunters followed game laws, wore orange, moved during legal hours. These men were something else entirely. She reviewed the footage carefully. 3 men, all carrying high-end rifles with expensive scopes. They disabled one of her cameras, but not before it captured their faces. The eldest looked to be in his 50s, with a gray beard and the kind of expensive outdoor gear that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The other 2 were younger, maybe 30s, with the cocky swagger of men who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. Sarah spent the next week watching, learning their patterns. They came every few days, always before dawn, always heavily armed. They weren't hunting for food. They were trophy hunting, and they were targeting the big game that called her mountain home. The evidence mounted quickly. She found gut piles where they'd cleaned their kills, taking only the heads and leaving the meat to rot. She found snare traps set along game trails. Most disturbing, She found evidence they were specifically targeting endangered species. Fresh tracks near a grizzly bear den that had been disturbed. The golden eagle nest above her cabin showed signs of interference. These weren't just poachers. They were the worst kind of poachers, the kind who killed for trophies and bragging rights rather than survival. The kind who saw wild animals as objects to be conquered rather than respected. Sarah had spent her military career protecting things that mattered. Freedom, democracy, innocent lives. Now she was retired, officially done with warfare. But some things were worth protecting, whether the Pentagon authorized it or not. She started with research. The older man was Marcus Rothwell, owner of a construction company in Billings with ties to several politicians. Rich enough to buy his way out of most trouble, connected enough to make problems disappear. The younger men were his son Derek and Derek's friend Tyler, both with records for hunting violations that had been reduced to minimal fines. The Rothwells had been doing this for years, Sarah learned. Moving from property to property, targeting private land where enforcement was minimal. They'd faced charges before, but Marcus's money and connections had kept them out of real trouble. Fines that meant nothing to a millionaire, license suspensions that they ignored. Sarah considered her options. She could call the authorities, but she'd learned enough about the local system to know how that would go. Marcus Rothwell donated heavily to the sheriff's re-election campaigns. The state wildlife officers were overworked and underfunded. Even if charges were filed, they'd be reduced to meaningless penalties. She could confront them directly, but 3 armed men who'd already shown disregard for law and nature weren't likely to be scared off by a woman living alone in the mountains. Or she could handle it the way she'd been trained to handle problems that threatened things she was sworn to protect. Sarah spent 3 days making her decision. She walked her land, visited every place the poachers had violated, saw every pile of rotting meat they'd left behind. She sat by the disturbed grizzly den and felt rage building in her chest. These men weren't just stealing from her property. They were stealing from the future, taking away the wild beauty that belonged to everyone. On the 4th day, she made her choice. Sarah cleaned her rifle for the first time since leaving the SEALs. A custom .308 that had never missed when it mattered. She checked her scope, confirmed her zero, and prepared for a mission that no commanding officer had authorized. The Rothwells had established a pattern. They always came through the same gap in the ridge, always set up in the same meadow where her elk herd liked to graze. They'd killed 2 bulls already, both magnificent animals that had lived on her land for years. Sarah positioned herself in a stand of pines overlooking their usual route, 800 yards from where they typically set up, well within her effective range. She'd learned patience in Afghanistan and Iraq, lying motionless for hours waiting for the right moment. This was no different. She didn't plan to kill them. Death was permanent, and these men, despite their crimes, probably didn't deserve permanent solutions. But they deserved to understand fear. They deserved to learn that some places weren't safe for predators like them. The morning was perfect for what Sarah had in mind. Light fog that would conceal her position, minimal wind to affect her shots. She was in place before dawn, watching the gap in the ridge through her scope. At 6:47 a.m., they appeared exactly as expected. 3 figures in expensive camouflage, moving with the confidence of men who'd never faced real opposition. They didn't know they were being watched by someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of invisible warfare. Sarah tracked them through her scope as they moved into position. Marcus Rothwell was scanning the meadow with binoculars, probably looking for the elk herd. Derek was setting up a shooting rest, preparing for a long-range shot. Tyler was playing with his phone, apparently trying to get a signal to document their illegal hunt. They never saw the danger until it was too late. Sarah's first shot wasn't aimed at any of the men. It was aimed at Marcus's expensive rifle, a custom-built weapon that probably cost more than most people's cars. The bullet struck the rifle's scope mount at 847 yards, destroying the optics and sending metal fragments into Marcus's face. He went down screaming, blood streaming from cuts around his eyes. Not permanently damaged, but certainly terrified and temporarily blinded. The second shot came before the other 2 could react. Derek's rifle simply exploded in his hands as Sarah's bullet struck the barrel. The weapon became twisted metal, completely destroyed. Derek stared at the wreckage in shock, not yet understanding what was happening. Tyler was the first to figure it out. "Sniper!" he screamed, throwing himself behind a fallen log. "Someone's shooting at us." Sarah's third shot answered his panic. The bullet struck the ground 6 inches from Tyler's head, sending dirt and rock fragments into his face. Close enough to terrify, precise enough to demonstrate that missing had been a choice, not an accident. "Next shot won't miss," Sarah's voice carried across the meadow, amplified by a small speaker she'd positioned during her reconnaissance. "You have 30 seconds to leave my land, and never come back." Marcus was still screaming, clutching his face. Derek was trying to help his father while scanning the tree line for threats he couldn't see. Tyler was pressed against the ground, probably reconsidering every decision that had led him to this moment. 20 seconds, Sarah announced. They ran. Marcus, half-blind and bleeding, stumbled toward the trail with Derek supporting him. Tyler abandoned his rifle entirely, sprinting for the ridge like the devil was chasing him. They crashed through the forest with all the stealth of stampeding cattle, branches breaking, voices raised in panic. Sarah watched them go through her scope, tracking their retreat until they disappeared over the ridge. She waited another hour, making sure they were really gone, before emerging from her position. The meadow was littered with their abandoned equipment. 2 destroyed rifles, expensive optics, a backpack full of illegal snares, and traps. Sarah gathered it all up, evidence of their crimes, and proof of her message. She drove their equipment to the sheriff's office that afternoon, not to file a complaint, but to make a donation. "Found this stuff scattered around my property," she told the deputy at the front desk. "Figured you might want to check for fingerprints, see if it matches any unsolved cases." The deputy, a young man who clearly didn't recognize the significance of what he was seeing, promised to file a report. Sarah doubted anything would come of it, but that wasn't really the point. The point was that Marcus Rothwell and his companions would never feel safe in the wilderness again. They'd learned that some places had guardians, and some guardians had the skills to enforce their protection. Sarah drove home as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and red. Her elk herd was grazing peacefully in the meadow where the poachers had planned their next kill. The mountain was quiet again, protected by someone who understood the value of wild places and wild things. She'd found her purpose in retirement. Not the purpose the Navy had given her, but something deeper, something that felt like coming home. Some people were born to protect things that couldn't protect themselves. Geography didn't matter. Authorization didn't matter. What mattered was standing between predators and their prey, regardless of whether the predators walked on 2 legs or 4. The Rothwells wouldn't be back. Sarah was certain of that. But there would be others, other men who thought money and connections made them immune to consequences. Other trophy hunters who saw her mountain as their personal game preserve. They would learn differently. Sarah Martinez had found her new mission. The mountains had a guardian now, someone who understood that some things were worth protecting at any cost. The wildlife didn't know they were safer, but safety wasn't something they needed to understand. They just needed to live, wild and free, the way nature intended. And as long as Sarah drew breath, they would. The local news barely covered the incident. A small item buried on page 6 of the Billings Gazette mentioned that prominent businessman Marcus Rothwell had been treated for minor injuries sustained during a hunting accident. No mention of illegal poaching. No mention of destroyed weapons. No mention of a mysterious sniper who'd sent 3 armed men running for their lives. Sarah wasn't surprised. Rich men like Rothwell had ways of controlling narratives, especially when those narratives might damage their reputations or result in serious criminal charges. She'd expected the cover-up. What she hadn't expected was the phone call. It came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the meadow incident. Sarah was splitting firewood when her satellite phone rang. The number was blocked, but very few people had access to her communications. "Martinez," she answered, automatically reverting to military protocol. "You made some enemies last month." The voice was female, professional, with a slight southern accent. "Enemies with connections. Who is this?" "Someone who thinks you did the right thing. Also someone who thinks you're about to be in serious trouble if you don't understand what you're really dealing with." Sarah set down her axe, moved to a position where she could see all approaches to her cabin. Old habits from war zones where phone calls sometimes preceded attacks. "I'm listening." Marcus Rothwell isn't just some rich hunter who got scared off. He's part of something bigger. A network that's been operating for years, moving through private lands, taking protected species, selling trophies to overseas buyers. You didn't just embarrass a poacher. You hit an organization that's worth millions. And you know this how? Because I've been investigating them for 18 months. Special Agent Jennifer Chun, Fish and Wildlife Service. I've been trying to build a case against the Rothwell network, but they're careful, connected, and very good at making evidence disappear. Sarah processed this information. A federal investigation meant this was bigger than local poaching. It meant her actions might have compromised an ongoing operation. It also meant she might have allies she didn't know about. What kind of network? High-end trophy hunting for clients who can afford to pay top dollar for illegal kills. Grizzly bears, wolves, golden eagles, sometimes even endangered species that aren't supposed to exist in Montana anymore. They've got buyers in Asia, Europe, wealthy collectors who want bragging rights more than they care about conservation laws. Rothwell runs this. Rothwell is middle management. The real money comes from above, people with enough influence to keep investigations buried. We think they've been responsible for the disappearance of at least 6 grizzlies from Glacier National Park, plus unknown numbers of other protected species. Sarah felt her anger building again. What she'd witnessed was just the visible tip of something much larger and more destructive. What do you need from me? Right now? I need you to be very careful. Rothwell's people know you're out there. They know you're skilled. And they know you cost them money and credibility. They're going to try to neutralize you. Let them try. I figured you'd say that. Former SEAL, Afghanistan, and Iraq, sniper qualified, decorated for actions that are still classified. You're not exactly helpless. Sarah wasn't surprised that Agent Chun had done her homework. Federal investigators had access to military records, even the ones that were supposed to be private. What aren't you telling me? The network has resources you haven't seen yet. Private security, some of them former military like yourself. They've dealt with threats before, people who got too close to their operations. Those people had accidents. Fatal ones. Accidents. Hunting accidents. Car accidents on mountain roads. One investigative journalist fell off a cliff while hiking alone. All very unfortunate, very explainable, and very convenient for the people they'd been investigating. Sarah understood. She was dealing with an organization that had killed to protect itself, people who saw murder as a business expense rather than a moral line. They wouldn't try to scare her off. They'd try to eliminate her. I can protect myself. I know you can. But I also know that you care about the wildlife on your land. They'll use that against you. Poison water sources, set fires, kill animals just to hurt you. These people don't have limits. The threat to her animals changed everything. Sarah had chosen this fight to protect the wildlife, not to put them in greater danger. What do you suggest? Partnership. I share what I've learned about their operations. You share your observations from the ground. Together, maybe we can build a case that'll stick. And if the case falls apart like all the others? Agent Chun was quiet for a moment. Then, we consider alternative solutions. Sarah understood. The federal agent was offering unofficial cooperation, the kind that might not appear in any official reports. When can we meet? Tonight. There's an old fire lookout tower about 12 miles northeast of your property. Abandoned since the 1990s, but the road is still passable. Midnight. I'll be there. Martinez? Come armed. If I'm wrong about you, I want to be able to defend myself. If I'm right about them, we both might need the protection. The line went dead. Sarah spent the rest of the day preparing for a meeting that could be a trap, an opportunity, or both. She cleaned her weapons, planned her route to the lookout tower, and studied satellite images of the area. If Agent Chun was legitimate, this could be the beginning of a real solution to the poaching network. If she was working for the other side, Sarah wanted to be ready for trouble. The fire lookout tower sat on a ridge that offered commanding views of the surrounding valleys. Sarah arrived early, positioning herself where she could observe the access road and the tower itself. Her night vision scope revealed Agent Chun arriving alone, exactly on time, driving an unmarked federal vehicle. The woman who emerged was Asian American, maybe 35, with the alert bearing of someone accustomed to dangerous work. She wore hiking clothes and a sidearm, but her hands were visible and unthreatening as she approached the tower. Martinez, she called softly. Sarah emerged from the tree line. Agent Chun. They studied each other for a moment, two professionals evaluating a potential ally. Chun was smaller than Sarah but moved with confidence. Her weapon was accessible but not drawn. She seemed genuinely interested in cooperation rather than confrontation. "Let me show you what we're dealing with," Chun said, pulling out a tablet loaded with files. The Rothwell network has been active for at least 5 years, possibly longer. They specialize in high-value illegal hunts for clients who pay between $50,000 and $500,000 for the right trophy. The files were extensive. Photos of dead grizzlies, wolves, and eagles. Financial records showing payments to offshore accounts. Communications intercepts that discussed hunting packages in coded language. Names and photos of network members, some of whom Sarah recognized from her security cameras. How big is this operation? We think they're active in at least 4 states, with connections to similar networks in Alaska and Canada. The money flows through shell companies and foreign accounts. But we've tracked at least 12 million in transactions over the past 2 years. Sarah studied the photos of dead animals, feeling her resolve harden. These weren't subsistence hunters feeding their families. These were wealthy predators paying to destroy irreplaceable wildlife for entertainment. Who's running it? That's where it gets complicated. Chin pulled up another file. Marcus Rothwell reports to someone called the Collector. We don't have a real name, just communications and financial transfers. Whoever they are, they have serious political protection. Protection how? Investigations get shut down. Evidence disappears. Witnesses develop memory problems. 2 years ago, a state wildlife officer got too close to the network. He was transferred to a desk job in Helena and told to forget what he'd seen. And you think this Collector person ordered hits on people who got too close? I think they have resources that go beyond normal criminal organizations. Private security, political connections, maybe even federal contacts. Someone's been feeding them information about our investigations. Sarah considered the implications. A criminal network with inside information about federal investigations was more dangerous than random poachers. They would know Agent Chun was investigating them. They might already know about this meeting. Are we compromised right now? Possibly. That's why I wanted to meet somewhere isolated, somewhere I could be sure we weren't followed. Chun paused, studying Sarah's expression. There's something else. We intercepted communications suggesting they're planning something big in this area. A hunt for a legendary prize that could bring in over $1 million. What kind of prize? We're not sure. Could be an albino elk, a massive grizzly, something rare enough to attract their highest-paying clients. All we know is that it's supposed to be on or near your property. Sarah felt cold anger building in her chest. Her land, her animals, were being targeted by people who saw them as commodities rather than living beings. The elk herd that grazed peacefully near her cabin, the golden eagle family nesting in the cliffs, the black bear den where cubs would be born in spring. All of it was being evaluated by predators who measured worth in dollars rather than ecological value. When? Soon. Maybe within the next few weeks. They're bringing in specialists for this hunt, people with military backgrounds and advanced equipment. It's not going to be like the Rothwell incident. These will be professionals. Good, Sarah said quietly. I'm tired of dealing with amateurs. Agent Chin smiled grimly. I figured you'd see it that way. But you need to understand, these people have killed federal agents before. A ranger in Alaska who got too close to their operations. His body was found 3 months later, officially listed as a bear attack. You have proof. I have suspicions and a lot of circumstantial evidence. The kind that makes for good investigation files, but bad courtroom cases. Sarah understood the frustration. She dealt with similar situations in the military, where everyone knew who the enemy was, but couldn't prove it in ways that satisfied lawyers and politicians. Sometimes proof had to be created through action rather than investigation. What do you need from me? Eyes and ears on the ground. You know your property better than anyone. If they're planning something big, you'll see the preparations. Advanced scouting, equipment caches, communication installations. They'll have to position resources before they bring in their high-paying clients. And in exchange, I share everything I learn about their operations. Names, faces, vehicles, communication frequencies. Plus, I make sure any evidence of your defensive actions gets lost in bureaucratic shuffles. It was a reasonable deal. Sarah got intelligence support for her one-woman war. Agent Chin got ground truth from someone with the skills to gather real information. Both of them got plausible deniability if things went wrong. One condition, Sarah said. If this investigation doesn't work, if these people keep operating despite your evidence, I handle the problem my way. I can't officially authorize that. I'm not asking for official authorization. Agent Chin nodded slowly. Understood. Just try not to start a war. I don't start wars, Sarah replied. I finish them. They spent another hour sharing information. Chin provided details about network members, their vehicles, communication patterns, and known safe houses. Sarah shared her observations about local wildlife patterns, terrain features, and security vulnerabilities. By the time they parted ways, both women had a clearer picture of the threat they were facing. Driving back to her cabin, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. The satisfaction of having a mission with clear objectives and competent support. Agent Chun was professional, skilled, and committed to protecting the same things Sarah valued. Together, they might actually be able to stop the network. But Sarah wasn't naive. Federal investigations took time, required proof that met legal standards, and could be derailed by political pressure. The animals on her mountain couldn't wait for bureaucratic solutions. They needed protection now, from someone willing to operate outside official channels. Sarah spent the next few days studying the intelligence Chun had provided. The network was larger and more sophisticated than she'd realized, but it wasn't invincible. Like any organization, it had vulnerabilities, communication patterns, supply chains, personnel who made mistakes under pressure. She also began preparing for the legendary hunt Chun had mentioned. If someone was willing to pay $1 million to kill something on her land, Sarah needed to know what they were targeting. She increased her surveillance patrols, checked her cameras more frequently, and paid special attention to the largest and most impressive animals on her property. The answer came sooner than expected. Her trail cameras captured images of the prize the network was pursuing, and Sarah understood why someone might pay a fortune for the chance to kill it. Walking through her high meadow, alone and magnificent, was the largest grizzly bear she'd ever seen. Not just large, enormous, probably over 800 pounds, with a coat so dark it appeared almost black in certain light. A bear that shouldn't exist in Montana, a creature from another age when giants walked the wilderness. Sarah named him Grandfather, in honor of his age and majesty. She estimated he was at least 20 years old, a survivor from an era when grizzlies faced fewer threats. He moved through her land like he owned it, which in many ways he did. This was his territory, his home, his right. And someone was planning to kill him for money. The network had chosen their target well. Grandfather was trophy hunting's holy grail, a bear so magnificent that wealthy hunters would pay anything for the chance to claim him. His death would be a tragedy beyond measure, the loss of a creature that represented everything wild and free about the American wilderness. Sarah made a promise to herself and to the mountain. Grandfather would not die on her watch. Whatever resources the network brought to bear, whatever professionals they hired, whatever political protection they enjoyed, it wouldn't be enough. She'd protected freedom and democracy for 22 years in the military. Now she would protect something even more fundamental, the right of wild things to exist without being commodities for human entertainment. The network was coming. Let them come. Sarah Martinez was ready for war. The advance team arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, driving unmarked vehicles with government plates. Sarah spotted them from her observation post on Eagle Ridge, 2 miles from her cabin, but with perfect sight lines to monitor anyone approaching her property. 3 black SUVs, moving in tactical formation, stopping at intervals to deploy personnel with military precision. Through her spotting scope, Sarah counted 12 individuals, all carrying advanced communications equipment and what appeared to be military-grade surveillance gear. These weren't the amateurs like Rothwell and his son. Agent Chin had been right. The network was bringing in professionals. Sarah photographed everything, using a camera with a telephoto lens that could capture details at extreme range. Faces, vehicle license plates, equipment configurations. She'd learned in Afghanistan that intelligence gathering was often more valuable than immediate action. The team established a base camp 3 miles from her property boundary, in a section of national forest that provided good concealment and multiple escape routes. They moved with the efficiency of people accustomed to operating in hostile territory, setting up communications arrays, camouflage shelters, and what looked like an equipment depot. Through her scope, Sarah studied their leader, a tall man with prematurely gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He directed the setup with hand signals and brief radio communications, maintaining operational security even in what they probably considered safe territory. Sarah recognized the type. Special operations background, probably Army Rangers or Delta Force, the kind of man who'd spent years in places where mistakes got people killed. He would be intelligent, experienced, and very dangerous. She uploaded her photos to a secure server that Agent Chun had set up, then settled in for a long surveillance session. Understanding enemy capabilities was the first step in defeating them. Over the next 2 days, the team's purpose became clear. They were conducting detailed reconnaissance of Sarah's entire property, mapping terrain, wildlife patterns, and security vulnerabilities. They used drones, thermal imaging cameras, and motion sensors to build a complete picture of the battlefield. Because that's what this was becoming, a battlefield. Sarah countered their surveillance with her own operations. Moving through terrain she knew intimately, using skills honed in combat zones, she planted her own cameras and listening devices near their base camp. If they were gathering intelligence on her, she would return the favor. The intercepts revealed disturbing information. The team wasn't just preparing for grandfather's hunt. They were planning to neutralize what their communications referred to as the local threat, Sarah herself. Target has military background, sniper qualified, demonstrated hostile intent. Came through clearly on one transmission. Recommend full tactical response. Understood, the team leader replied. Client wants the bear alive for transport. Target eliminated for security. Sarah felt ice in her veins. They weren't planning to kill grandfather on her mountain. They were planning to capture him alive, transport him somewhere for a controlled hunt that would guarantee their client's success. It was worse than simple poaching. It was the commoditization of a magnificent wild creature. And they planned to kill her to eliminate the threat she represented. Sarah called Agent Chun on their secure line. They're not just hunting the bear. They're planning to take him alive. What do you mean? Tranquilizer equipment, transport cage, the works. Someone's paying for a guaranteed kill in a controlled environment. Chun was quiet for a moment. That's significantly worse than we thought. If they're capturing live animals for transport to private hunting facilities, this isn't just poaching anymore. It's organized wildlife trafficking. There's more. They know about me, and they're planning to eliminate me before they move on the bear. How long do you have? Sarah checked her notes from the intercepted communications. 3 days. The client arrives Friday. The operation goes live Saturday morning. I can have a federal response team there by tomorrow night. No. Sarah's response was immediate and firm. Federal agents coming in will just escalate this into a gunfight with civilians at risk. These people have political protection. They'll claim it was a misunderstanding, lawyer up, and disappear while their evidence gets suppressed. So what do you suggest? I handle it the way I was trained to handle threats to things I'm supposed to protect. Agent Chun understood. Officially, I can't authorize that. Officially, you don't know what I'm planning. Sarah, these are professionals. Former military like yourself. They'll be expecting resistance. Good. I perform better when the other side knows what they're facing. Sarah spent that evening planning her defense. 12 professional operators against one former SEAL might seem like overwhelming odds, but Sarah had advantages they didn't. Intimate knowledge of the terrain, prepared positions, and the motivation that came from protecting something irreplaceable. She also had something they couldn't expect, the mountain itself. Sarah's property included several features that could be turned into defensive advantages. A narrow canyon that provided the only vehicle access to the high meadow where grandfather denayed. Ridgelines that offered perfect sniper positions. Trails that could be blocked or channeled to create kill zones. Most importantly, she had weeks of intelligence about their capabilities and intentions while they only had basic information about her. The first step was protecting grandfather himself. Sarah had been tracking the Great Bear's movements for months, learning his patterns, understanding his territory. She knew where he liked to fish, where he dug for roots, where he would likely be when the hunters came. Using techniques learned from wildlife biologists, Sarah prepared a mild sedative that would keep the bear unconscious for several hours. Not enough to harm him, but enough to keep him safely hidden while the battle raged around his territory. She found Grandfather at his favorite fishing spot just before dawn on Thursday, a deep pool where mountain trout gathered before their autumn migration. The bear was magnificent in the early morning light, his massive frame moving with surprising grace as he caught fish with casual efficiency. Sarah approached downwind, moving with infinite patience. Grandfather was accustomed to her presence by now, but she needed to get close enough to administer the sedative without triggering his fight-or-flight response. The dart gun fired with a soft puff of compressed air. Grandfather looked up briefly, shook his massive head as if annoyed by a mosquito, then continued fishing. Within 10 minutes, he was sleeping peacefully beside the pool. Sarah dragged the bear's unconscious form to a cave system she'd prepared earlier, a hidden den deep enough underground to mask his thermal signature and isolated enough that searchers would need days to find him. She left him with water and food for when he woke up, then sealed the entrance with carefully placed rocks that looked natural but would keep him safe. Phase 1 complete. Grandfather was protected. Now for the hard part. Sarah spent Thursday night moving through her property, setting up the kind of defensive system that had made her famous among special operations communities. Remotely detonated charges positioned to block escape routes. Trip wires connected to flashbang devices. Cameras that would relay enemy positions to her command post. She established her primary fighting position in a rock formation overlooking the canyon approach, with sight lines covering the entire kill zone and multiple escape routes if she needed to relocate. The position was invisible from below, but offered perfect fields of fire for someone with her marksmanship skills. By Friday evening, Sarah was ready. Her mountain had become a fortress designed to protect one sleeping bear from 12 professionals who thought they understood what they were facing. The client arrived exactly on schedule. Sarah watched through her scope as a helicopter landed at the enemy base camp, disgorging a single passenger, an elderly Asian man wearing expensive hunting clothes and carrying what appeared to be a custom rifle worth more than most people's annual salary. Through her listening devices, Sarah learned his identity, Lu Wei, a Chinese billionaire who collected trophies from the world's most dangerous and rare animals. He'd reportedly paid $2 million for the opportunity to hunt Grandfather in a controlled environment where success was guaranteed. "Where is the bear?" Lu Wei asked in accented English. "Secured in the transport area," the team leader replied. "We'll move him to the hunting ground tomorrow morning. He'll be conscious but contained, exactly as you requested." "Excellent. And the local threat will be neutralized before the hunt begins. You'll have complete safety and privacy for your experience." Sarah smiled grimly. They were so confident in their plan, so certain of their superiority, that they'd never considered the possibility that one former SEAL might be more than they could handle. They were about to learn differently. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, perfect conditions for what was about to unfold. Sarah was in position before sunrise, watching through her scope as the enemy team prepared to move. They advanced in 2 groups. 8 men moving toward Grandfather's known territory to search for the bear, for remaining with the client as security. The team leader clearly expected to find Grandfather sleeping in one of his usual spots, tranquilize him for transport, then deal with Sarah as a secondary objective. It was a reasonable plan based on incomplete intelligence. Sarah let them reach the canyon before she opened fire. Her first shot struck the lead man's radio antenna, destroying their primary communications and announcing that they were under attack by someone with serious marksmanship skills. The team immediately took cover, but they were in terrain that offered limited protection against a sniper positioned above them. "Contact! Sniper on the ridgeline," came the shouts from below. Sarah's second shot struck the team leader's rifle, destroying the weapon and sending fragments into his hands. Not fatal, but certainly attention-getting. The return fire was immediate and professional. These men knew how to operate under fire, coordinating their movements and attempting to flank her position. But They were operating in terrain Sarah had prepared specifically for this scenario. The first pair to attempt flanking maneuvers triggered her tripwires, flashbang devices that temporarily blinded and disoriented them without causing permanent damage. Sarah wasn't trying to kill these men. She was trying to convince them that continuing this operation would be more expensive than their client was paying. Her third and fourth shots destroyed 2 more rifles, leaving half the assault team effectively disarmed. The psychological impact was enormous. An invisible enemy who could destroy their weapons at will, who clearly had the skill to kill them if she chose, but who was showing restraint they probably didn't deserve. Fall back! Fall back! The team leader shouted. But falling back meant crossing the canyon, and Sarah had prepared that route as well. As the team attempted to retreat, they triggered charges that blocked the vehicle approach with rock slides. Their escape route was cut off. Were pinned down. Came over the radio frequencies Sarah was monitoring. Request immediate extraction. The response from their base camp was not encouraging. Negative on extraction. Roads are blocked. Helicopter can't land in current tactical situation. Sarah had anticipated that as well. Her property included several small clearings that could accommodate a helicopter landing, but each one was covered by her rifle. Any aircraft attempting to extract the team would face the same accurate fire that had already demonstrated its capabilities. The standoff continued for 3 hours. Sarah maintained her position, occasionally firing warning shots to prevent the team from organizing any serious counterattacks. They were trapped in terrain that offered minimal cover, facing an enemy they couldn't see, gradually running low on ammunition and water. Finally, the team leader made the call Sarah had been waiting for. Control, this is Alpha Team. Mission abort. Repeat, mission abort. Target site is not secure for client operations. Understood, Alpha Team. What about the primary objective? Sarah keyed her radio into their frequency. The primary objective is under my protection, she said calmly. And he's staying that way. The silence on the frequency lasted for several minutes. Then, the team leader's voice came back, professional despite the circumstances. Unknown station, we're prepared to withdraw. What are your terms? Simple, Sarah replied. You leave. You don't come back. You find a different way to make a living that doesn't involve killing things that belong on this mountain. And if we refuse? Sarah's next shot answered that question, striking the rock 6 inches from the team leader's head. Close enough to feel the concussion, precise enough to demonstrate that missing had been a choice. You don't want to find out, Sarah said quietly. The withdrawal began 20 minutes later. Sarah watched through her scope as the enemy team emerged from their cover, hands visible, weapons abandoned. They moved in single file toward their base camp, maintaining discipline despite their obvious frustration. The helicopters arrived 2 hours later, lifting out the assault team, their client, and all their equipment. Lu Wei never got his guaranteed hunt. The network never captured Grandfather. Sarah's mountain remained wild and free. Agent Chun arrived that evening, ostensibly to investigate reports of gunfire in the area. She found Sarah sitting on her porch, cleaning her rifle, looking perfectly innocent. Heard there was some excitement up here, Chun said with a slight smile. Mountain lions, Sarah replied. Had to scare off a whole pack of them. They were threatening my livestock. Mountain lions travel in packs now. These were unusual mountain lions. Very well equipped, very well organized. But they got the message. Chun nodded seriously. I'm sure they did. Any chance these particular mountain lions might trouble other properties in the area? I doubt it. They seem to learn pretty quickly that this isn't hunting territory for their kind. Good to know. I'll make sure to include that in my report. After Chun left, Sarah walked up to Grandfather's temporary den and removed the rocks she'd used to seal the entrance. The great bear emerged slowly, still groggy from the sedative, but unharmed by his experience. Grandfather looked at Sarah for a long moment, his small black eyes seeming to hold something that might have been understanding. Then, he ambled off toward his fishing spot, ready to resume his normal life in a world that was safer because one former SEAL had decided some things were worth protecting. Sarah watched him go, feeling the satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. The network had been defeated, their client sent away empty-handed, their assault team convinced that her mountain was too dangerous for their operations. But she knew this victory was only temporary. Rich men who collected trophies didn't give up easily, and Organizations like the one she defeated had resources she couldn't match indefinitely. The real war was just beginning. The retaliation came 3 weeks later, during the first heavy snow of winter. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of vehicles in the distance, immediately recognizing the tactical situation she'd been expecting. They weren't coming for grandfather this time. They were coming for her. Through her bedroom window, Sarah could see orange light flickering against the low clouds. Something was burning on the eastern edge of her property. She grabbed her rifle and night vision equipment, moving to her observation post to assess the threat. The fire was spreading through a section of forest that bordered her land, but it wasn't a natural wildfire. Through her scope, Sarah could see the burn pattern was too regular, too controlled. Someone had set multiple ignition points to create a fire that would drive wildlife toward her cabin, where they could be easily killed. This wasn't just an attack on Sarah. It was an attack on everything she'd sworn to protect. Her satellite phone buzzed with an incoming call from Agent Shun. "Sarah, we're tracking a wildfire near your position. Are you safe?" "It's not a wildfire. It's arson designed to flush out the animals so they can be killed easier." "Jesus, how many hostiles?" Sarah scanned the perimeter with her thermal scope, counting heat signatures positioned around her property. "At least 15, maybe 20. They've got the place surrounded. I can have federal response teams there in 4 hours. The animals will be dead in 1 hour. I'm going to stop this now." "Sarah, wait. These people have already proven they're willing to kill federal agents. This could be a trap designed to draw you out." "It's definitely a trap. But they made one mistake." "What's that?" Sarah was already moving toward her equipment cache, pulling on body armor and checking her weapons. "They think this is their hunting ground. It's mine." The next part of the conversation was lost as Sarah powered down her phone and switched to combat mode. She'd spent months learning every trail, every rock formation, every defensible position on her land. The attackers might have numbers and equipment, but Sarah had something more valuable: complete understanding of the battlefield. Her first priority was stopping the fire before it spread to areas where wildlife couldn't escape. Sarah had prepared for this possibility, installing a series of irrigation sprinklers fed by the mountain stream that ran through her property. The system wasn't designed to stop a major fire, but it might slow the spread long enough for her to deal with the arsonists. Moving through the darkness like a ghost, Sarah reached the control station for her irrigation system. The sprinklers activated with a soft hiss, sending water arcing over the threatened forest. It wouldn't stop the existing fire, but it would prevent the flames from spreading further. Phase 1 complete. Now for the hard part. Sarah's thermal scope revealed the enemy positions. 3 teams of 5 men each, positioned to create overlapping fields of fire around her cabin. They'd established a kill zone designed to eliminate her if she tried to defend her property directly. It was a good plan. Unfortunately for them, Sarah had no intention of defending her cabin. She was going to take the fight to them. The first team was positioned on a ridge overlooking her cabin, probably expecting her to try to escape that way. Sarah approached from below, moving up a game trail she'd used hundreds of times. Her years of practice moving silently through mountain terrain served her well. Even with their night vision equipment, the attackers never saw her coming. Sarah's first shot took out the team leader's night vision goggles, leaving him effectively blind in the darkness. Her second shot destroyed the radio antenna on their vehicle, cutting off their communications with the other teams. The team immediately returned fire, but they were shooting at muzzle flashes from an enemy who was already moving to a new position. Sarah had fired from a spot she could abandon immediately, relocating to prepared fighting positions before they could coordinate a response. "Contact. Team 1 under fire," came the shouts from the ridge. Sarah keyed her radio to their frequency. "You're burning my forest," she said calmly. "That stops now. Unknown station. You are interfering with a lawful operation. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Sarah's laugh was cold. "Lawful? You set fires on federal land to kill protected wildlife. The only law operating here tonight is mine." Her next shot proved the point, striking the rifle of one of the men on the ridge and sending him diving for cover. Sarah was methodically disarming them, destroying their equipment piece by piece, demonstrating that she could kill them anytime she chose, but was showing restraint they probably didn't deserve. The psychological impact was enormous. These men were professionals, but they were facing an enemy who seemed to be everywhere at once, who could strike with precision from positions they couldn't see, who clearly had skills that matched or exceeded their own. Team 2, Team 3, converge on Team 1 position, came over their radio. Sarah smiled grimly. Exactly what she'd been hoping for. As the other two teams moved to support the first, they had to cross terrain. Sarah had prepared for exactly this scenario. Trip wires triggered flashbang devices that temporarily blinded and disoriented them. Remotely detonated charges blocked their escape routes, forcing them into areas where Sarah had clear fields of fire. The battle raged for 2 hours, with Sarah moving constantly through positions she'd prepared and memorized. She destroyed rifles, radios, vehicles, and night vision equipment, systematically degrading their capability to operate as an organized force. But she was careful not to inflict serious casualties. These men were professionals doing a job, probably unaware of the full scope of what they were involved in. They deserved to be defeated, not killed. As dawn approached, the attackers found themselves trapped in terrain they couldn't navigate, facing an enemy they couldn't see, with most of their equipment destroyed or abandoned. The fire they'd started was under control, contained by Sarah's irrigation system and natural fire breaks. The team leader finally made the call Sarah had been waiting for. Control, this is Bravo Team. Operation compromised. Request immediate extraction. Negative, Bravo Team. Mission parameters have changed. Target is to be eliminated regardless of cost. Sarah felt her blood turn cold. The voice on the radio wasn't one of the field operatives. It was someone speaking from a position of authority, someone with the power to authorize lethal operations. Control, be advised target has superior tactical position and demonstrated sniper capabilities. Recommend abort and reassess. Bravo Team, you have your orders. Target elimination is authorized by highest levels. Use any means necessary. Sarah understood. Someone with significant political power had decided she represented too great a threat to their operations. This wasn't about capturing grandfather anymore. This was about silencing the one person who'd proven capable of disrupting their entire network. The game had just changed from tactical exercise to life-or-death struggle. Sarah's radio crackled with Agent Chen's voice on a different frequency. Sarah, you need to know something. We just intercepted communications indicating they've called in military contractors. People with experience in black operations. How many? Unknown. But they're coming in by helicopter within the hour. Sarah, these aren't regular security contractors. These are the kind of people who've done wet work for government agencies. Sarah processed this information. Professional killers with military training and government connections were a different threat than regular security personnel. They would have access to equipment and authorization that ordinary contractors couldn't obtain. I need extraction for the wildlife, Sarah said. Can you coordinate with state wildlife management to relocate the animals to safe areas? Already in progress. We've got teams standing by to tranquilize and relocate any animals in immediate danger. Good, because I'm about to make this place very dangerous for anything that breathes. Sarah had prepared for this possibility as well. Hidden throughout her property were weapons caches, ammunition supplies, and equipment she'd acquired through channels that didn't appear on any federal forms. If the network wanted to escalate this to military-level operations, she was prepared to respond in kind. The helicopters appeared just after sunrise, 3 black aircraft moving in attack formation. Through her scope, Sarah could see they weren't civilian aircraft. These were military helicopters, probably borrowed or stolen from government stockpiles. The aircraft landed in the meadow where grandfather used to graze, disgorging a dozen men in full military gear. Unlike the previous attackers, these operatives moved with the precision of people accustomed to killing for a living. Sarah keyed her radio to Agent Chen's frequency. Chun, I need you to contact every media outlet you can reach. Tell them there's a military operation happening on private land in Montana. Get cameras up here. Get public attention on what's happening. Why? Because these people are using government resources for illegal operations. The only way to stop them is to make it public. Sarah, if media attention exposes what you've been doing. I've been protecting wildlife on my own land from armed criminals. Let them try to spin that as a bad thing. The new assault team approached Sarah's defensive positions with professional competence, using proper fire and movement tactics, coordinating their advance through radio communications that indicated serious military training. Sarah was ready for them. Her first shot struck the lead helicopter, punching through the engine compartment and forcing an emergency landing. Her second shot destroyed the communications array on the aircraft, cutting off the team's ability to coordinate with their controllers. Sniper, 2 o'clock ridgeline, came the immediate response. But Sarah was already moving, relocating to a position that offered better fields of fire and multiple escape routes. These men were good, but they were operating in terrain she knew better than her own heartbeat. The battle intensified quickly. Unlike the previous attackers, these operatives were shooting to kill, using military-grade weapons and tactics designed to eliminate threats permanently. Sarah found herself in the kind of firefight she hadn't experienced since her final deployment in Afghanistan. She responded with the skills that had made her legendary among special operations communities, moving constantly, striking from unexpected angles, using the terrain to her advantage. Every shot was precisely placed, every movement calculated to maximize effectiveness while minimizing exposure. But 12 professional killers were more than one person could handle indefinitely, no matter how skilled. Sarah needed to change the tactical situation before they could coordinate an effective assault on her positions. She triggered the charges she'd placed around the meadow, creating an artificial avalanche that blocked the helicopter's escape route and forced the assault team into a confined area. Then, she activated every piece of defensive equipment she'd installed over the past months. Motion sensors triggered additional flashbang devices. Remotely controlled sprinklers filled the air with mist that degraded visibility and thermal imaging. Speakers positioned throughout the forest began broadcasting the recorded sounds of a massive grizzly bear, creating auditory confusion that masked Sarah's actual position. The psychological impact was devastating. The assault team found themselves trapped in a killing ground designed by someone who understood their capabilities and had prepared countermeasures for every tactic they might employ. "This is insane," came over their radio communications. "Target has turned the entire area into a fortress." "Maintain position," responded their controller. "Reinforcements are en route." Sarah smiled grimly. More reinforcements meant more evidence of illegal military operations on American soil. Agent Chun was already coordinating with federal authorities and media outlets. Every additional helicopter, every additional operative, made it harder for the network to claim this was a legitimate operation. The sound of approaching aircraft confirmed that the network was doubling down on their commitment to eliminating Sarah. But it also confirmed that they were about to expose themselves to the kind of public scrutiny that had destroyed other criminal organizations. Sarah keyed her radio to the frequency the assault team was using. "Unknown operatives, you are trespassing on private land and engaging in illegal military operations. You have one opportunity to withdraw before this becomes a federal incident. Negative. You are designated a terrorist threat and will be neutralized." "Terrorist." Sarah's voice was deadly calm. "I'm protecting my land from armed criminals who set fires to kill wildlife. You're using military equipment against American citizens on American soil. Who exactly is the terrorist here?" The silence on the radio frequency lasted for several minutes. Then, a new voice came on the line, speaking with authority that indicated high-level decision-making. "Ms. Martinez, this is Control. We're prepared to offer terms for your withdrawal." Sarah recognized a negotiation when she heard one. Someone with real power had decided the situation was becoming too public, too expensive, too politically dangerous to continue. "I'm listening. Complete cessation of operations in your area. All personnel withdraw, no future incursions on your property. In exchange, you cease hostile actions and maintain silence about this incident." "Not good enough," Sarah replied immediately. "I want the entire network shut down. No more operations in Montana, no more trafficking of protected species, no more paying to kill animals that belong in the wild. That's not within our authority to negotiate." "Then, get someone on the line who has that authority. Because every minute you delay, more federal agents and media representatives are heading this way. Soon this conversation will be happening on national television." The truth was, Sarah didn't know how many federal agents Chun had been able to mobilize, or whether any media outlets were actually responding. But The threat of exposure was apparently enough to concern the people controlling the operation. "Stand by," came the response. Sarah used the pause to relocate to a position with better observation of the assault team. They were maintaining their perimeter, but had stopped advancing, apparently waiting for new orders from their controllers. 20 minutes later, a new voice came on the radio. Older, with the kind of authority that suggested very high-level government connections. "Ms. Martinez, this is Director Collins, Fish and Wildlife Service. I understand there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of operations in your area." Sarah almost laughed. A federal director was now claiming the military assault on her property was a misunderstanding. "Director Collins, I'm former Navy SEAL Sarah Martinez, and I can tell the difference between a federal wildlife operation and an illegal military assault. What's happening here is the latter. I assure you, Ms. Martinez, all operations in your area are authorized under federal wildlife protection statutes. Which statutes authorize setting fires to kill protected wildlife? Which statutes authorize using military helicopters against American citizens? Which statutes authorize trafficking live animals to private hunting facilities?" The silence on the radio lasted long enough that Sarah began to think the connection had been lost. Then, Colin's voice returned, notably more respectful than before. "Ms. Martinez, I believe there may be criminal elements operating under false federal authority. If you're willing to stand down, we can coordinate a proper federal response to investigate these allegations." Sarah understood. Collins was offering her a face-saving exit while positioning the government to distance itself from the illegal operations. It wasn't perfect justice, but it might be enough to shut down the network. "Director Collins, I'm willing to cooperate with legitimate federal authorities. But I want guarantees that this network's operations are ended permanently, not just relocated. You have my personal commitment that any criminal operations in this area will be investigated and prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law." It was as much as Sarah could reasonably expect to achieve through negotiations. The network would be shut down, at least temporarily. The assault team would withdraw. Her mountain would be safe, for now. "Understood, Director Collins. I'm standing down." The withdrawal began within an hour. Sarah watched through her scope as the assault team loaded their equipment and boarded helicopters that no longer appeared on any federal inventory records. By afternoon, her property was quiet again. Agent Chun arrived that evening with a team of federal investigators and crime scene technicians. They documented evidence of the arson, the illegal military operation, and the network's trafficking activities. "How much of this will actually result in prosecutions?" Sarah asked. "Some of it. The lower-level operatives, definitely. The people giving orders?" Chun shrugged. "They have lawyers and connections. But their network is blown, their operations are compromised, and they know they can't operate in this area without facing serious resistance." Sarah nodded. It wasn't complete victory, but it was enough to protect what mattered most. Grandfather and the other wildlife on her mountain could live safely, at least for the foreseeable future. But Sarah knew this was only one battle in a larger war. There would be other criminal networks, other threats to the wild places, and wild things she'd sworn to protect. She was ready for them. 6 months after the military assault on her property, Sarah Martinez sat on her porch watching grandfather teach his cubs to fish in the stream below her cabin. The massive grizzly had found a mate during the winter denning season, and spring had brought 2 small bears who tumbled and played under their father's watchful protection. The scene was peaceful, natural, everything Sarah had fought to preserve. But peace in the mountains didn't mean the war was over. Agent Chin arrived just after noon, driving the unmarked federal vehicle that had become a familiar sight on Sarah's property. Over the past months, they developed a working relationship that operated outside official channels, but served both their purposes. "How's retirement treating you?" Chin asked, settling into a chair on Sarah's porch. "Busy," Sarah replied, handing her a cup of coffee. "Got a call yesterday from someone in Alaska. Seems they have a similar problem with illegal hunting operations targeting protected species. Let me guess. They want the Montana solution." Sarah smiled. Something like that. The Montana incident had become legendary within certain circles. A former military operative who'd single-handedly dismantled a criminal network that had operated with impunity for years. The story had spread through wildlife protection communities, reaching people who faced similar threats with fewer resources to respond. You know, the Bureau can't officially support vigilante operations, Chin said carefully. Good thing I'm not asking for official support. They sat quietly for a while, watching grandfather's cubs explore their territory under their mother's supervision. The bears were completely comfortable with Sarah's presence, accepting her as part of their mountain community rather than a threat to be avoided. There's something else, Chin said finally. We've been tracking communications that suggest the network wasn't completely shut down. Some of the people involved in the assault on your property have reorganized under different leadership. Sarah wasn't surprised. Criminal organizations were like weeds, cut off one part, and another would grow to replace it. Where? Wyoming mostly, but also Colorado, Alaska, even some operations in Canada. It's like they learned from what happened here and decided to distribute their operations to make them harder to target. Makes sense. Centralized operations are vulnerable to disruption. Distributed networks are more resilient. Chin pulled out a tablet loaded with intelligence files. We've identified at least 8 separate cells operating across North America, each one targeting different species, using different methods, but all connected to the same financial networks that funded the Montana operation. Sarah studied the files, recognizing patterns from her military experience. This wasn't just criminal activity anymore. This was organized warfare against North American wildlife, conducted by people with serious resources and professional capabilities. What does the Bureau want me to do about it? Officially? Nothing. We're conducting our own investigations, building cases, working through proper legal channels. And unofficially? Chin was quiet for a long moment, obviously weighing her words carefully. Unofficially, some of us think proper legal channels aren't moving fast enough to protect the animals these networks are targeting. Every month we spend building court cases is another month of irreplaceable wildlife being destroyed for profit. Sarah understood. Chun was offering her something that went far beyond their original cooperation. She was offering partnership in a campaign that would operate outside federal oversight, targeting criminal networks that the legal system couldn't touch quickly enough to matter. I'd need intelligence support, real-time communications intercepts, financial tracking, personnel identification. Already arranged. There's a joint task force of federal agents who are tired of watching these networks operate with impunity. They're willing to share information with someone who's proven capable of acting on it effectively. And if something goes wrong, if I get caught operating outside legal boundaries, then you were acting as a concerned private citizen protecting wildlife on your own property. The federal government had no knowledge of your activities. It was the kind of arrangement Sarah had operated under during her military career, official deniability combined with unofficial support. She would have the resources to be effective, but she would also bear full responsibility for any consequences. How many networks are we talking about? 8 confirmed, possibly more that we haven't identified yet. They're operating across thousands of square miles, targeting everything from grizzly bears to golden eagles to endangered wolves. Sarah considered the scope of what Shin was proposing. It would mean years of dangerous work, traveling across the continent, facing professional criminals who'd already proven their willingness to kill federal agents. It would also mean protecting countless animals that couldn't protect themselves, preserving wilderness areas that belong to future generations, and stopping criminals who saw wild beauty as nothing more than commodities to be sold. I'll need a base of operations. Somewhere I can plan operations, store equipment, maintain communications. Your property here would work perfectly. Remote enough for operational security, large enough for whatever facilities you need, and already established as your legal residence. Sarah nodded. Her mountain could become the headquarters for a campaign that protected similar places across North America. It was fitting, somehow. The place she defended would become the center for defending others. What about funding? Chin smiled for the first time during their conversation. That's already been arranged. Several conservation organizations have established a foundation that provides grants for wildlife protection research. Very generous grants, with minimal oversight requirements. And if these networks figure out what we're doing and decide to retaliate, then they'll be retaliating against someone who's already proven capable of handling their best professionals. Plus, you won't be operating alone anymore. Chen pulled up another file on her tablet. Photos of men and women in military gear, all with the bearing of people accustomed to dangerous work. Former special operations personnel who've decided they want to do something that matters after leaving military service. Rangers, SEALs, Marine Force Recon, Air Force Special Operations. All volunteers, all committed to protecting things that can't protect themselves. Sarah recognized the type. People like herself, who'd spent years serving their country and were looking for a way to continue that service in civilian life. Military skills applied to conservation goals, special operations tactics used to protect endangered species. How many? 15 so far, but more are expressing interest every month. Word is spreading through veteran communities about what you accomplished here. There are a lot of former military personnel who want to be part of something like this. The scope of what Chun was describing was enormous. A private organization with military capabilities, federal intelligence support, and unlimited operational authority. It could be incredibly effective, but it could also be incredibly dangerous if it operated without proper oversight. What about rules of engagement? Legal boundaries? Accountability? Same rules that governed your operations here. Minimum necessary force, protection of innocent life, focus on disruption rather than elimination. You'd have complete operational authority, but you'd also be responsible for ensuring your people operate within reasonable bounds. Sarah spent the next week thinking about Chen's proposal. She walked her mountain, visited the places where she'd fought to protect what mattered, watched grandfather's cubs grow stronger and more confident each day. The peaceful scene on her land was what she'd fought for, but it was only a tiny fraction of what needed protection. Across North America, criminal networks were destroying irreplaceable wildlife, while legal systems moved too slowly to stop them. She made her decision on a morning when fresh snow dusted the peaks, and grandfather led his family past her cabin with the casual confidence of animals who knew they were safe. Sarah called Chun on their secure line. "I'm in. I hoped you'd say that. When can we start?" "We already have. Send me the intelligence files on the Wyoming operation. I want to understand what we're facing before we commit resources." Over the next month, Sarah's mountain transformed from a quiet retirement retreat into a command center for operations across the continent. She built a communications facility in her basement, established secure file servers for intelligence sharing, and constructed training facilities where her new team could prepare for operations. The first recruits arrived in late summer. Jake Morrison, former Army Ranger who'd spent 6 years in Afghanistan and wanted to use his skills to protect rather than destroy. Maria Santos, former Marine Force Recon who specialized in mountain warfare and wildlife tracking. David Kim, former Navy SEAL explosives expert who'd grown up hunting but had become disgusted with trophy hunters who killed for sport rather than necessity. Each recruit brought skills that complemented Sarah's capabilities while sharing her commitment to protecting things that couldn't protect themselves. They weren't mercenaries or vigilantes. They were professional soldiers applying military expertise to conservation goals. The team spent 3 months training together, learning to operate as a unit while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to different environments and threats. They practiced with non-lethal weapons, studied wildlife behavior, learned to move through natural environments without disturbing the ecosystems they were protecting. Most importantly, they established rules of engagement that emphasized protection of life, both human and animal, while allowing them to effectively disrupt criminal operations. Their first mission targeted the Wyoming network Chun had identified. 3 weeks of reconnaissance revealed an organization that was trafficking live wolves to private hunting facilities in Texas, where wealthy clients paid enormous sums to hunt endangered species in controlled environments. The operation was smaller than the Montana network, but more vicious. They were capturing wolf pups and killing the adult pack members, selling the young wolves to facilities that raised them for slaughter, while eliminating wild wolves that couldn't be commodified. Sarah's team struck during the network's next capture operation. Using tactics developed on her Montana property, they disabled vehicles, destroyed equipment, and convinced the criminals that continuing their operations would be more expensive than their profits justified. But they also did something new. Instead of simply driving off the poachers, they documented their crimes, gathered evidence of their trafficking operations, and turned that evidence over to federal authorities through channels that couldn't be traced back to Sarah's team. The Wyoming network was shut down within a month, with several key figures facing federal charges for wildlife trafficking. More importantly, the wolves they'd been targeting were relocated to protected reserves where they could live and breed safely. It was the model Sarah wanted to establish: military efficiency combined with legal accountability, direct action that complemented rather than replaced proper law enforcement. Word of the Wyoming success spread through both criminal and conservation communities. Criminal networks began to understand that operating against protected wildlife carried serious risks. Conservation organizations began to hope that someone was finally fighting back effectively. More recruits arrived at Sarah's Mountain. Former special operations personnel who wanted to serve something larger than themselves. Wildlife biologists with military training who could combine scientific knowledge with tactical skills. Even former law enforcement officers who were frustrated with legal constraints that allowed criminals to operate with impunity. By winter, Sarah was commanding a team of 30 people operating across 12 states. They called themselves the Wildlife Protection Unit, though no official organization by that name existed in any government records. The WPU operated like a military unit with a conservation mission. Small teams conducted reconnaissance, identified criminal operations, and executed precisely planned raids that disrupted trafficking networks while gathering evidence for legal prosecutions. They didn't kill criminals, but they made criminal operations so expensive and dangerous that most networks found legal alternatives more attractive. They protected thousands of animals that would otherwise have been destroyed for profit. They preserved wilderness areas that belonged to future generations. Most importantly, they sent a message that wild places and wild things had defenders with the skills and commitment to protect them effectively. Sarah stood on her porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and red. Grandfather was fishing in the stream below, teaching his cubs techniques that would keep them alive in a world that was safer because people like Sarah had decided to make it so. Her phone rang. Another call from another place where criminal networks were destroying irreplaceable wildlife. Another opportunity to protect things that couldn't protect themselves. "Martinez," she answered. "Ma'am, this is about an operation in British Columbia. Grizzly trafficking, very sophisticated, very well-connected. They're asking for the Montana treatment." Sarah smiled. The Montana treatment had become shorthand for effective action against wildlife criminals. It meant military professionalism applied to conservation goals, immediate results that complemented long-term legal solutions. "Send me the intelligence files," Sarah said. "We'll handle it." She ended the call and returned to watching the peaceful scene below her cabin. This was what she'd fought for, what her team continued to fight for. Not just the safety of animals on her own land, but the preservation of wild beauty everywhere it existed. The war against those who would destroy nature for profit would never truly end. There would always be people who saw wild animals as commodities rather than living beings, who measured wilderness in terms of profit rather than preservation. But now there were also people like Sarah and her team, former warriors.